Orale! Bienvenidos and welcome to the Familia FFB podcast. This is your host, Jorge Martin. Familia, I got a special episode. We're breaking up a little bit into the NFL Insider Series. Still got a couple in there, but you see who's sharing the screen with me. It's going to be a great show. You're going to learn so much. Also, make sure you're on Familia FFB on YouTube. Our numbers have been growing lately. Please, please, please give us a thumbs up. Give us a subscribe. Set those notifications because you're going to keep getting great content all the way through the football season. And also make sure you're going to underdogfantasy.com. Use that promo code Familia23. You're going to get matched up to the first $100 when you make your first deposit. You put in 100, they put in 100, and then you can just draft best ball all the way up to kickoff on September 7th. Familia, get in there. Best ball season. This is the best time to get in there. And Familia, speaking of one of the best, I mean, I'm just always thrilled whenever I get to, spend time with, chat with, kind of listen to and talk to, have them on my show. Sometimes we just chop it up on our own. I mean, you know what? Dr. Edwin Porras, Doctor of Physical Therapy. Gosh, I mean, Kansas State's favorite son. I tell you, I mean, just one of my favorite people. Fantasy Points has made him their medical expert for several seasons now, and it's awesome. And he's one of the great follows on Twitter at FB Injury Doc. I mean, follow him. You're gonna help you win your league. So let's bring him in here, Dr. Edwin Porras. Edwin, bienvenido. Bienvenido. Muchas gracias.
Jorge, thank you for having me on. I'm so excited to be here. You're too nice to me, man. You give me too long of an intro because it's not merited. It's just two friends chopping it up, talking fantasy football. And man, over the last few years at this point, 2021 maybe, we became pretty good friends offline. And so I really value that more so than the fantasy stuff, but the fantasy stuff is fun too. It's fun to talk shop a little bit. So let's do it, man. I'm excited.
Definitely. One of these days we do have to share a beer, not a Coors Diesel like Graham Barfield likes to drink. So
he's backpedaled. He's since backpedaled his Coors Diesel takes. He goes, well, it was kind of funny at the time. He's like, I don't drink them anymore. So I had to shame him a little bit. So it's been good. It's been a good time with the Diesel.
Well, that's what happens when you're in Colorado. You get the extra stuff. So
that's right.
Oh man. So we're on the eve of training camp right now, and it's so much. This is the time where everybody's going to be in the best shape of their lives. Everybody's going to be everybody who's coming off an injury. They're planning to be there for week one, no matter what. And but you know what? It's one of those things that reverberating. You just had a recent sit down with Graham, and you're working on your book, which I definitely want to give you a chance to promote. It's all based around injury prone is a lie. So I'm going to give you the floor first. Regurgitate the premise and tell me a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so the book is something that's been a long time coming. I remember telling, actually, funny enough, Denny Carter, the first year that I was a fantasy analyst back in 2019, and we were talking about this, and I asked him, what do you think the chances are that somebody would be interested in, the fantasy community would be interested in a book? And he was very encouraging, like, you should do it for sure. Like, I think that's something that would be useful, beneficial. And I never got around to it, man. Like I just didn't have the manpower. I didn't have the bandwidth. So now it's coming together, and been working on it for, honestly, before the 2022 season even ended. So it's going to have pretty much everything that you could possibly want. It's going to have return timelines for the common injuries. How did they perform in their first week back? When did they return back to baseline? What are their peripherals and their touches, their metrics look like when they're coming back from injury? What is it, from a season-long perspective, and from a dynasty or redraft or like a draft guide perspective, we're looking at ACLs, looking at Achilles. How do you identify outliers? How does athleticism impact performance? How does a team use a guy after they come back from these injuries? Like all of these major questions that I get every single year with every single guy is going to be in that book. In addition to profiles, right? And the tiers, like my injury volatility tiers that come out every year. We're going to have 25 plus profiles. Some of the guys that we're mentioning today are going to be in those profiles. So the best way to do that, and we'll throw the link in that at some point, I'll send it to George. Sign up for my newsletter. It's a free newsletter. I don't spam, I promise. Make sure you check your junk once you confirm that you signed up for it. And that those people that are on the newsletter are going to get, they're going to be the first ones to know when it drops. They'll be the first to be notified. And we can go from there. But in terms of the injury prone stuff, there is going to be a chapter in there sort of giving an intro about what you just asked, George. It's like, what does that mean? Injury prone is a lie. A lot of people think that I'm saying nobody gets injured when it's the exact opposite. We have data and studies to suggest that 98% of NFL players in an NFL season will be injured. Bottom line, period. Everybody gets hurt. So if everybody gets hurt, how do we know anybody's injury prone, right? The issue with those studies is we don't see it play out that way. You can look at guys who have had a cluster of injuries. Think about someone in the past like Keenan Allen, a ruptured spleen. What the heck is that? An AC joint sprain, an ACL tear. All those things happened within the first 2 years of his career. And he's went on and he's been fine. That's because those injuries can sometimes cluster to one individual and they can be random. Another time, we'll get questions every year. Inevitably, I always end up getting at least one question about one team. And it's always, hey, why are this year, these guys are always really injured. Do you think that it's because it's their strength and conditioning program? Do you think it's this? Do you think it's that? It's like, no, a lot of times it's a random chance. Guys get injured and a lot of them get injured at the same time frequently. So the point that I'm saying, to bring it full circle, when it comes to fantasy stuff, if we can identify outliers, if we can know, hey, these injuries are random, or hey, these injuries probably are not random, and we learn who to fade and we learn who not to fade and take above ADP, that is literally textbook 101, how you gain an edge, how you gain an advantage. That's why it's so important. I think that people sort of devalue histories and they're either all in or like, oh, they make some excuse like it doesn't matter. There's going to get so much volume, blah, blah, blah. Or it's, oh, this guy's burned me so many times. I'm not really excited about their ADP, but it's always somewhere in the middle. And it's always so specific. That's why this book in particular is going to try to give a rough guideline about how the process works and how my brain works when I draft, when I, make trades, when I am trying to decide who I want to draft, who I want to place bets on. Those are all that's going to be in that book. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So I'm excited for it.
No, I think in a lot of ways you become even more emboldened. I mean, has it evolved at all, your mission statement over the last 4 years since you started and been practicing? You're on mute.
My fault. I was on mute. The way that I feel that it's evolved is in the way that I communicate it. I think I realized early on people are interpreting when I say injury prone is a lie. I think it often gets interpreted as, oh, you're saying that nobody gets injured, or you're saying that there's no such thing as, getting injured. Like, no, I'm saying the opposite. Like the exact opposite is what I'm saying. Everybody gets injured. It's our job to wade through and find out who is actually going to be injured more frequently based on their history, and who is kind of just has had really bad luck. And it's not easy to do. That's why I get paid to do it, right? That's why they pay me the medium-sized bucks, the small-sized bucks, to try to figure out who those people are, so I can help you and help you win your fantasy league. That's my favorite part, honestly, is identifying these holes or gaps that I think that, because the market has gone so sharp. Like the sharper the market has gotten, I think the harder it is to find any edges. And I think injuries, because they're so niche and so specific and yet still play such a crucial role in an individual and a team's performance, I think that we still have not fully realized how much we can actually gain, how much of an edge we can gain from being informed and up to date on these.
And your work with the Twins, the past, it's been a season last year, a full season last year, and part of the way through this year, we're past the All-Star break, so you're almost home. But how has that seeing, treating these athletes? I know the injuries aren't always the same, but a hamstring is still a hamstring, and and a shoulder is still a shoulder. What how has that kind of like further helped you?
I think one of the things that's interesting is seeing the injuries up close, at least the ones that are common, right? Or the ones that are that commonly overlap, and seeing the ones that aren't. And I think the context is so different because as a physical therapist in baseball, we get these guys, and a lot of times the fastest we can get a guy back to playing baseball, in a game, we're talking about the most simple, let's say, a hand fracture, a finger fracture, a tiny fracture that doesn't even need a pin placed, something that's going to heal with time, but we need to give it time. The fastest we'll get a dude back is like 3 or 4 weeks. It's different in football because these athletic trainers and PTs oftentimes combine ATs, PTs. They are triaging these guys from a car crash they are getting them out of pain as much as possible. They're taping them up. They're wrapping them up. They're configuring. They're doing rehab programs. They're doing everything, and they're sending them to the MD. And sometimes they might be getting medication, whatever that entails. And they are triaging them to move on to next week. And I think that's the difference that I've noticed, even in the micro, because when a guy comes to rehab, it's established, all right, he's probably going to be down for, let's say, 3-4 weeks minimum. When I watch athletic trainers work here, it's like, all right, what can't you do? Okay, now tell me what you can do, and we're going to modify that and send you back out. So knowing and understanding that context really helps drive home for me is that in reality, George, I would venture to say that most guys are playing hurt. Most guys are going, by the time week 2, maybe week 3 hits, these guys are all hurting at some point in some way, shape, or form. And a lot of times, again, it behooves us to try to identify, okay, which one of these guys is really hurt and which one of these guys is just having some bad luck and down on his luck right now.
Awesome. Awesome. I love it. Have you had, any, gosh, I mean, well, I'm going to point out one thing. One thing I heard you recently talk about is, that really hit home with me is how some players just never recover their past performance from catastrophic injuries, like an ACL or an Achilles tear. They never get back to where they were, even some high level athletes. I know we saw Saquon Barkley come back and he was fantastic last year, but you pointed out that the rate of guys that don't even come back by the second season is much higher than people think.
Yeah, no, it is. So this is straight out of the newsletter that I mentioned before. This is a newsletter
Yes.
I put out last month. And this is regarding ACLs and specifically to running backs. I'm just going to read it right off the page. This section is titled "The Harsh Reality." Here's the brutal truth. Since 2010, a total of 36 NFL running backs have torn their ACL and returned or attempted to return within 15 months. So that excludes like 2 guys, maybe 3 guys. Thinking Jerick McKinnon, who he was out 2 years, right, and then came back and has a bit of a resurgence. And there's another guy. I don't remember who it was. It was like 2010, so it was a while back. He came back in like Hightower. Remember Tim Hightower? For some reason, he took a long hiatus. I could never really find. That was kind of like before everything was on the internet, so I couldn't really fill in the gaps of what happened there. But he was out of football for like 3 years or something crazy. So those guys are excluded. But other than that, it's most guys. So since 2010, a total of 36 NFL running backs have torn their ACL and returned or attempted to return within 15 months. Out of this group, 20 players failed to return whatsoever. That's more than half. That's 53%. Those guys just never came back. That's after an ACL tear. So if you want to give me the apples to apples argument, how it's not the same thing, high level guys versus, whatever. Okay. So shrinking down that sample to a total of 15 to include running backs who either in the season before the injury or if they played at least 3 or 4 games in the season that they injured it, they averaged at least 7.5 points per game on PPR basis. Only 7 of those, 7 of those, didn't return in year 2. So that still like reflects the bigger sample. So from 2012 to 2020, for wide receivers, the rate of never returning in their second year was 33%. So, I mean, we're talking these gaps, these 33% and 53%. Like there's a massive gap in the guys who just simply don't come back after an ACL tear. So I get a lot of like, oh yeah, an ACL has become like an ankle sprain, or I know that modern medicine has advanced so much because of ACLs. It's like, well, not really, but kind of. And so when we see these guys like J.K. Dobbins struggle in their first year back, when we see guys like Dalvin Cook when he came back after his ACL and have a hamstring issue, like we see bits and pieces of, oh, well, this is why this guy with low draft capital, undrafted free agent struggling to make the roster in the first place, and the team just cuts him, gives him an injury settlement and just lets it be. Like we see glimpses of that even in the high level guys. So we are not at a point, even with ACLs, to say that we can successfully rehab and get every guy back to high level performance.
And that's I think just kind of makes me want to have this show, because we're kind of like at the point where there's so much injury optimism out there. Everyone's coming back. And I think one of the things that you've told me in the past, that like an ACL tear, yes, a guy can come back at 9 months, but it's better for, more than likely the graft that, as you mentioned, the graft doesn't take until a year, maybe even 15 months. And that's, I mean, that's the thing. How much should we kind of like tamp down a little injury optimism and realize that it just takes the body time to to get better the way it did J.K. Dobbins, and it took almost till the end of the season?
Yeah, so that's so hard, and that's where it becomes a case by case basis, like an individual basis. So the issue with having injury optimism is that we can't apply it blanketly to every player, because every player is going to be different. Saquon Barkley is going to be different than a Breece Hall, is going to be different than a J.K. Dobbins, is going to be different than a Javonte Williams, is going to be different than a Jordy Nelson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All of these guys, they had different injuries, they have different recovery timelines, they just had a different experience altogether. But I can tell you, in those criteria that you're kind of alluding to it right now. So how do we identify those outliers? How do we identify those criteria? That's the basis of this entire book that I'm putting out. Is okay. Number one, do they have like high? And we're talking high performers, right? We want a guy back. We want to draft him with confidence. Do they have extremely high NFL draft capital? Number one. Front offices will invest in them. They're psychologically invested in them. They're financially invested in them. They want to see them return. That is the number one factor. The second factor is, are they extreme freak athletes? A lot of times that sort of bumps them automatically into the tier of do they have high draft capital? Well, are they extreme freak athletes? Like, we're talking top 10, top 5% athletes, even in football, right? For football, like for football players in general. The other thing you want to look at is, again, and I mentioned it a little bit ago, is how complex was the injury? And I'll couple that one with how long ago was the injury? How long ago was the surgery? Not the injury. How long ago was the surgery? Because you mentioned, we looked at a guy like Chris Godwin. I advocated for Chris Godwin a lot last year, but I specifically said, do not expect much from Chris Godwin until middle of October, end of November, right? If these guys can come back at 7.5 months like Michael Gallup did, it's just not a good recipe for success. Michael Gallup struggled. He admitted his knee was bothering him. He admitted he wasn't psychologically there. You talk or you look at a guy like Chris Godwin. I mean, yeah, he came back at 8 months, but at what cost? He ended up sitting out another 3 or 4 weeks until he came back at the recommended 9 months anyway. You can't tell me that didn't play, into why he was injured in the first place. So all of these factors you have to bake in. So I know I was rambling a lot, but to summarize, high draft capital, freak athleticism, and enough minimal complications or a minimal involvement in the injury, and enough time to recover. So between 9 and 10 months for an ACL. Those are all the things that, if in a nutshell, that's how we identify, guys like Adrian Peterson. That's how we identify guys like Dalvin Cook. He was on a tear. That's how we identify Saquon Barkley, who before the fluke injury, I've been on this podcast. I've said it before. I've been on the stream before. That was 2021 was a freak deal. He fractured his opposite side ankle when he stepped on a defender when he was away from the play. That was a freak thing. That's how we identify that guy. That's how, now we're looking at Breece Hall and we're optimistic about Breece Hall. And that's why we're not as optimistic as Javonte Williams. Those are all the factors I look at, and the medical community at a larger scale looks at, to identify who we can draft confidently and who we can't.
Oh, that's awesome. And that's a big reason why I'm kind of one of the guys I'm high on is J.K. Dobbins this year, because he's coming off, he's got the full year to rehabilitate. And that's the thing. There's a can you kind of talk about the difference between a player who's rehabilitating an injury or one who's just training through a normal off season, and how much that's an advantage for that player?
Yeah. So the advantage in having enough time to recover cannot be overstated. You look at a guy like Jordy Nelson. If I remember correctly, I'm doing this off the top of my head. He tore his ACL in like August, right? So he had a full calendar year to rehab, to get his strength back, to get his speed back, work with S&C to clear up any potential like mobility deficits he had. I mean, he had plenty of time to get to the point where he was at a high level, performing at a high level by the time week 1 of the following season came around. So time is one of the most important factors in recovery in general. Is just giving the body time to heal, giving yourself psychological reassurance that you're back to normal and doing things at a high speed, at a high rate. Those are all super important. And without time, you can end up in a situation like Michael Gallup or Chris Godwin, or honestly, even in reality, J.K. Dobbins. And we know that guys like Jamal Murray in the NBA have taken more than a year to return from their ACL. That's pretty progressive. That's a progressive thought, that to not come back after an ACL until whatever it was for him. It was a long time for him. That is a progressive idea, because the idea is, all right, we'll slow cook it. We'll take as long as we possibly need to, even if it's an extra amount of time. And by the time you get back, you're going to hit the ground running. It's going to be like you were. I can't say like you were never injured, but as close to pre-injury as we possibly can. So for a guy like Jake, but you're never going to see that in the NFL, which leads to some of the conversation about Kyler Murray. You're never going to see an NFL player, at least in my opinion, take more than 9 to 10 months, if possible, to come back and be in a game after an ACL. Or you're never going to see them take a season off voluntarily or, unnecessarily. If they can be out there, they're going to be out there. And that's just the nature of the beast.
Oh, fantastic. So one of the guys I remember last year, and he was kind of like one of the injury prone as a lie poster children, was CMC, Christian McCaffrey, going into the season. He hadn't had any surgeries. Different injuries, different body parts got hurt that happened, like what you said. And he was a guy that you recommended a lot. A lot of people were still fading him. So at age 27, he's in apparently a perfect environment for him. What's your confidence level in him for this year? And also, are there any players with a similar narrative that you're kind of bumping up for this year?
Yeah, so good question on Christian McCaffrey. Like, I'm not going to lie. It was tough to be out on a limb in 2021 on Christian McCaffrey, and it was hard to be out on a limb in 2022 with Christian McCaffrey. If you remember, just for those who maybe are uninitiated to what happened with Christian McCaffrey, in 2020, he was out for, I want to say, 4 games. No, it was the high ankle came first. They took the long route with the high ankle. So he was out 6 or 7 weeks with high ankle, comes back, gets an AC joint sprain when he gets tackled, misses another 4 games, comes back, is apparently training and coming back and has a quad strain, and then they just shut him down, right? That's 2020. 2021 comes around, injures his hamstring. Okay, well, his hamstring's not doing very well right now. What's going on there? Comes back, re-injures the hamstring, they shut him down. And in 2022, people were losing their minds, George. I don't know if you remember. It was like it was the first week in October. And he sat out practice with like some quad tightness on a Tuesday or on a Wednesday or something. And I said, relax, keep it calm. And what do you know? Christian McCaffrey played. I think he played every game this year, right? Like,
He did.
Some of these guys just take some patience. You have to look at the big picture. How do you look at a guy who's had 2 contact injuries to totally different regions of the body and 2 soft tissue injuries in different parts of the same body part? Like, that's just bad luck. Like, you have to realize that's just bad luck for a guy who missed like 2 games when he played in college. So when it comes to guys of like, who do I view similarly in that light? I can't really put my finger on any guy that is quite in that same situation. But if you made me pick a guy, I would say somebody like Rashad Penny. I would say somebody potentially like DeAndre Swift. I would say those guys who have had probably had just really bad luck. And I say that with some objective data and with some opinion.
No, I like that. I like that. And those are 2 guys that we're going to be talking about. And also 2 guys who are in very good situations for a running back, with a great offensive line, a great quarterback who is a running threat himself. So a lot of times that takes a guy out of the box. So they're not facing just a full stack box. So yeah, I think there's a lot of reason to be really optimistic about those guys. So we can definitely talk about them. So I want to get kind of a quick hit on several players who are coming off of surgeries, and one of them, and he's, let's just jump into him. You mentioned him already, Breece Hall, coming off the ACL injury. He had surgery on October 23rd of last year, so he'll be about 10 and a half months on week 1. Just about there when it comes to the season. I know you said 9 months is the minimum. The car crashes with the running backs are tough, and people are really optimistic. He's being drafted number 30 overall in Underdog. Talk to me. Dígame.
All right. So Breece Hall. I'm going to read you again right out of the newsletter here, and this chapter is going to be also in the book itself. So we're going to focus on key attributes of the 5 running backs who made remarkable recoveries within 1 year of surgeries. Age and draft capital have shown strong correlations with returning to the same level of play and having a prolonged career. Let's take a look at the traits exhibited by 5 players who came back and bounced back in year 1, which bounce back means met at least 90% of their pre-injury levels in their first year back from an ACL. There were 5 of them. 4 out of the 5 were 25 or younger at the time of the injury. 4 out of the 5 were exceptionally athletic, and we're talking like 92nd percentile in the 40-yard dash. We're talking 82nd percentile in SPORC, the fantasy points is athletic metric. 4 out of the 5 had a minimum of 9 months dedicated to rehab. Guess who the freak was? The one freak was who didn't need 9 months. Adrian Peterson. No surprise there. He was a freak of nature. He came back in like 8 months. 4 out of the 5 possessed at least round 3 NFL draft capital. 4 out of the 5 did not start on the PUP. And 4 out of the 5 averaged at least 2.7 PPR points per game with their receiving skills. In addition to these factors, we can't overlook the impact of experience itself on skill development. So a guy like Dalvin Cook, who it's hard to count him in that group, which is why I didn't, because he was a rookie and he was, on the superstar track at that point. But it's hard to differentiate. Is he better because it's the second year, or is he better because of the ACL tear, which is playing more of a factor? So that's also something experience. So with all those things, George, I talk about age, I talk about SPORC score, 40-yard dash, time to recover. The one thing I did mention was the minimally complicated ACL, right? So now let's look at all those things. And do they start on the PUP, etc. Now let's look at Breece Hall's profile specifically. 21 years old, 96th percentile SPORC score, 92nd percentile 40-yard dash, 9.75 months to rehab by the time week 1 rolls around. He was a 36th overall pick in the NFL draft. He averaged a ridiculous 5.82 PPR points per game via the receiving game. And his surgical procedure, from what we know, what we understand, was not complicated. It was a relatively straightforward ACL with a potential, I think, a meniscus trim. So they just had to cut some of the meniscus out. And as of now, we don't think he's going to be on the PUP by week 1. And that's what I mean by PUP. So with all of those factors in line, does that mean that he could fail? Like, yes, there are paths for Breece Hall to fail. They've been drafting running backs like they're going out of style, the Jets have. They've been taking them, signing them, drafting them. They've been connected to reports to Dalvin Cook. Like, all of these things have happened. Like, yes, there are ways for him to fail. He can have a fluke injury like Saquon did. He can have a hamstring strain. That could be from some sort of workload related injury. Like, these things can happen. It's not a slam dunk. But at RB, or I think you said just pick 30 overall. There is no reason on this planet, and I've been doing it myself. You can't start wide receiver, swing back around Breece Hall, go wide receiver again, and then just hammer the rest of your roster, depending on obviously the structure, the format, etc. But you can definitely go. I would not hesitate in most drafts to go hero RB with Breece Hall, understanding the type of risk that I'm taking on. And just filling in on the back end like you typically would with any other hero strategy. That's pretty. I know that's a little bold. That might be not for the faint of heart, but I have no issue doing that. I won't overdo it, but I have no issue doing that.
No, that's interesting, because the one thing. So, what signs do we need to see during training camp? Because he's probably not going to play during preseason games. What signs do we need to hear to be confident that he's going to be, a day one guy, or maybe just kind of like slow played in, not too many leagues like Saquon was in 2021?
Well, I think the first thing is to not trust reports that you see, because a lot of times they're not the most accurate. When Saquon Barkley's 2021 season started, there were some NFL Network reports saying that they might not even let him play until week 5 or 6. And that was just ludicrously absurd. That was never going to happen. So these reports, I think the way we should interpret them is it needs to track, it needs to add up. Like last year, J.K. Dobbins, this time last year, he was saying how he was going to, he said basically everything except I'm going to be comeback player of the year. Like, that doesn't track when you had a complicated ACL tear. You're still in the pool doing pool rehab at 10 months or whatever it was, et cetera, et cetera. So what we like to hear is kind of nothing. Like, we like to hear Robert Saleh saying, yeah, Breece is doing good. Right. We like to hear that he's progressing as tolerated. We like to hear that he's running straight lines in OTAs, voluntary OTAs. We We like to hear that his surgery was not complicated. All the things that we want to hear to confirm our biases are what's coming out of New York right now. And I think the other thing is like this also for fantasy players, it also depends on your risk tolerance. Like I am okay with risking not seeing a full unleashed Breece Hall for 2-3 weeks so that on the back end, he's just crushing in week 15, 16, 17 for me. I am okay with taking that risk on because I think early season volume and early season production is overrated.
Yeah, the only thing I worry about that kind of scenario is just the fact that if you put yourself, if by grabbing him as your hero, and unless you really hammered the wide receiver, if you put yourself in an 0-3 hole and it's too big to dig out of, I'm with you. I mean, I think he's going to be. I think in the back half of the season, the most important games, I think he's going to be really important. The only thing that I worry about is who's going to be my RB3 that maybe I need to slot in there at if for some reason he misses a game here and there or isn't ready to go when the bell rings. So
George, I have a wise man once told me, very wise man, scared money don't make no money.
Muy cierto, muy cierto. Well, one of the things when I sat down with Troy Rank of the ABC of Denver 7, he was not optimistic about Javonte Williams, and I think you've talked about him. So let's get a quick hit on kind of like where he is. He had his surgery in October 9th, so he'll be almost 11 months. I didn't see anything specific on him, but Javonte Williams.
Yeah, man. Unfortunately, it's kind of the exact opposite of Breece Hall. Complicated injury, not as good of a pure athlete. They signed Samaje Perine almost immediately. They're linked. They're also linked, like the Jets, to Dalvin Cook and things that you just don't like to hear and you don't want to hear. And that's the reality. He's also at risk to start on the PUP. The reason that he could start on the PUP is, even though he's had more than a year since his surgery, is because it was a complex surgery. Those add an additional 4 to 8 weeks onto a recovery timeline. I do want to emphasize that this is not the same issue as J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins' injury was actually worse than Javonte Williams. So I'm probably relative to market. I want to speak very clearly here. Relative to market, I'm probably slightly higher on Javonte Williams, but it doesn't mean I love him. It doesn't mean that I'm going out of my way to take Javonte Williams. But I do think that we've overbaked the situation a little bit into his ADP, because I think a lot of people also don't consider that if you start the season on the PUP, it's no longer, I think it starts like 8 games at one point, right? Like at this point, it's 4 games. If you start on the PUP, you miss 4 games, you can come back the 5th week. So I don't want to take him as my RB2 or as my RB1. Ideally, he falls to me potentially as my RB2, 3, probably safer 3, 4, but he probably wouldn't make it that far. But, all of the metrics that I gave for Breece Hall, they're different for Javonte Williams. Obviously the complicated procedure with the LCL, the PLC. He also is only a 69th percentile sport athlete. His 40-yard dash is in the 40th percentile. I mean, it's looking tough. It's looking rough for him. It's probably going to be an uphill battle. But again, if he falls far enough, if he's my RB3, I probably would take him in that range, depending on what's available at other positions. I'd be fine with him. I think he'll be fine. I think he definitely comes with more risk, but he could provide some sort of floor for you, I think, in the middle to end of the season.
So we talked about, you mentioned Jonathan Taylor. Well, we haven't talked about Jonathan Taylor. He had an ankle surgery for a pretty bad high ankle sprain, got things cleaned up. January 25th was the surgery. So far, all the reports are he's going to be fine, but he hasn't practiced. Injury timeline for him, pretty good for starting training camp.
Yeah, from my understanding, the ankle issue was a pretty minor one. They went in. It sounds like it was just a cleanup surgery, so he should be ready by OTAs in camp. I mean, it's not funny. I don't want to say funny when it comes to talking about injuries and guys getting injured. This is their livelihood. This is their profession, and injuries aren't funny. But the narrative around the situation from the general public is humorous to me, in the sense that, okay, last year it was Jonathan Taylor hasn't ever even missed a practice. Since Pop Warner, Jonathan Taylor has participated in more practice than have existed. He's participated in 110% of all, games and practices and OTAs and weightlifting sessions and community service projects. And like, it just was outrageous. And I made the point last year to say, and again, I'm not trying to victory lap here. I made the point all last offseason. Jonathan Taylor can get hurt just as likely as Christian McCaffrey can get hurt. Now, does that mean that Christian McCaffrey's history didn't predispose him? No, but some freak thing can happen to Jonathan Taylor. There's no such thing as a slam dunk when it comes to health and running back specifically. And so when it comes to him this year, the ankle injury doesn't help him per se, but it's not preventing me from taking him anywhere. I'll put it this way. I'm more concerned with Anthony Richardson and the influence on the offense and how good that offense is going to be. I'm more concerned. That's more concerning to me if I'm drafting Jonathan Taylor than this ankle issue.
Yeah, I'm really high on Jonathan Taylor. I was stoked to get him at the end of the second round of the Scott Fishbowl draft. I mean, getting him at 212 in a super flex draft, it's just like, give me the championship right there. I think he's 24. He's 24, and he was the second highest ranked, second highest drafted running back, and probably should have been the highest drafted running back in his class. So no, I'm with you. I'm with you. Yeah. And Tony Pollard coming off, coming off a fracture, and it was in the playoffs, and so it's the ankle and I think it's the tibia. Is that the?
I think he had a fractured fibula. So he had a high ankle sprain, from what it sounds like, with a fracture of the fibula. So those are really common. They go in. Those are the types of procedures, and I think his was a little more involved. There might have been some tibia involvement there. But that's the type of fracture that if it's not a severe, you can actually do a tightrope surgery on, which is a lot less complicated. But I do think, I'm doing this off the top of my head again, I closed the window. Tony Pollard did have the hardware, but it should not affect him in a large, in a big way. Running backs coming off this, there aren't a lot of running backs coming off of this injury specifically. But when it comes to, again, his athleticism and the amount of volume he's going to get, I don't think that he's going to have a big issue.
Kyler Murray had his surgery on 12/12.
So we may have different sources. I have Kyler Murray's surgery on January 3rd. Which
I think his injury.
It might have been his injury. Yeah, it might have been. Yeah. So his surgery is on in like the first few days of January.
That's right.
And what we have on Kyler is, we have no idea if he's going to sit out all year. Teams want to win. Players want to play. Players want to compete. I will die on that hill. Maybe 1% to 2% of players, professional athletes, don't want to come back and compete and sit on their laurels. I don't think that he's going to be out, 8 weeks. I think since he's going to be 8 weeks by the time, or 8 months by the time that that week 1 rolls around, there is a chance he starts on the PUP. Again, like I mentioned earlier, that's 4 weeks. However, if we look at guys like Joe Burrow, Deshaun Watson, if we look at RG3 at the time, if we look at all these guys that have come back from these quarterbacks in the modern day, Carson Wentz, all these guys came back within 10 months or sooner. RG3 came back in 8 months. Maybe not the best example for overall of how you ended your career, but these guys, quarterbacks, can come back and contribute at 8 or 9 months. They have less of a time because they rely less on their mobility, and Kyler Murray obviously relies a little bit more than usual than average. But they rely less on being super hyper athletic every single play. And so they can return and be more effective. So will Kyler Murray come back at 8 months? I'm not entirely certain that'll happen. Can he be back and close to full speed by 9 months and contributing at his close to his ceiling by 10 months? Yeah, I do think that's the case. And I think that we're overstating how much we're overconfident that he's going to be, sit out 4 weeks and then sit out 6 and then sit out 8. I think we're overstating that.
Okay. Last one coming off an injury to talk about. Brock Purdy had the elbow. Right now, everything is they're talking like if he's healthy, he's gonna be the starter. It still feels like he's got. To me, it's still coming from the baseball background. I know he didn't have Tommy John, but it still feels a little aggressive for him to be ready for week 1.
No, it is on the border, but it's not unreasonable. If he has no setbacks, if his throwing program goes well, if he is psychologically ready, if the Niners get him the reps that they think that he needs, he could be out there in week 1. It's definitely possible. With this specific the higher, first of all, he had a repair, like you were saying. So it's not apples to apples here. But I have seen pitchers who, and I think it's important to point out, I forget to point this out, pitchers and quarterbacks, totally different forces through the shoulder and elbow, totally different amounts of volumes. Quarterbacks do much less volume. They have much less stress through the elbow, and they can come back from these TJ injuries a lot more quickly than pitchers can get back to pitching. But what I was going to say is I have seen guys get an actual Tommy John with the hybrid technique is what they call it, and pitching back in games by 9 months. That's aggressive. That's fast. But these days, over the last 5 to 10 years, it is possible. So because Brock Purdy had the lighter surgery, you know, the less severe and involved surgery, and because he is a quarterback, that 6 to 7 month mark is the sweet spot. As long as he doesn't have any setbacks, it is possible for him to be out there.
Okay. Awesome. So one of the things that I know you've talked about in the past, and we're going to zip through these last few players, you talked about the difference between injury prone and injury history. Can you sum up that real quickly? Because I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. So injury prone versus injury history. And again, this is going to be in the book. I don't want to pump it too much and keep referencing it. But in reality, I keep calling it the book, but it's really just my brain. These are like the facts and the data that's just in my head all the time. This when I do any type of analysis, these are the types of numbers that I go through in my head. And when you look at re-injury rates, right? So I'm looking at it right now. This is going to be published in the book. So we're looking at within season recurrence rate, and we'll call it a true recurrence rate, which essentially means how many times year to year over a period of 5 years does this actually recur. High ankles, they have a pretty high within season injury re-injury rate, 32%, but it's less than 5% from year to year, right? You look at something like a knee injury, that's about a 13% recurrence for wide receivers. Let's look at chest shoulder injuries. Now, those do have a little bit of a higher recurrence rate from year to year at 21%, right? That's 1 in 5. So if you have, you're looking at a guy who has a shoulder injury. Okay. Maybe in the future, they have compared to baseline, they have about a 21% chance to have the injury again. Same thing with hamstrings. Hamstrings have a high within season and true recurrence rate at 30% within season. That's pretty high. At 34% true recurrence rate, you can bet there's a decent chance at some point from 1 year to the next, you're going to have another hamstring recovery. Keenan Allen, perfect example. Mike Evans, another example. Chris Godwin, another example. The list goes on and on and on. When you're really splitting hairs, and if you do hundreds and hundreds of drafts, I promise you, taking into account an injury history is going to do much more for you than sitting there going, well, Nick Chubb could get a high ankle sprain, or even though he's never had one, and Jonathan Taylor could get a lateral ankle sprain like he did this year, and that could happen. And Justin Jefferson could always get a concussion. These things those are the things we cannot predict. That, to me, that is low value. That's like in basketball, that's like a low value play, right? That's like crossing half court, and unless you're Steph Curry or Dame Lillard, just chucking it from half court. That's not a high percentage shot. So take a high percentage shot. Look at injury history, look at the rates, look at what the recurrence is, and then make a decision from there that's educated as opposed to guessing.
Oh, awesome. I love it. So you mentioned DeAndre Swift and Rashad Penny. Anything you'd want to add about the two of them beyond what you already said as far as two guys who have a injury history?
I would be concerned more for DeAndre Swift than I would be for Rashad Penny. DeAndre Swift has had 2 shoulder issues at this point. He's had the AC sprain on one side, and then what I think, based on video and based on everything that we've seen from DeAndre Swift, I do think he had a similar injury that we saw in T. Higgins 2 years ago, that we saw in Jalen Waddle this year, that we saw in Dallas Goedert. I think it's that, and I don't think the fracture necessarily, but I do think he has some sort of, we'll call it like an internal shoulder issue that doesn't necessarily go away even with rehab. I don't know how that will hold up. So I'm a little concerned for him. I do want to see more out of him. I do want to see that he can play. Although I do think it's overstated the amount of time that he's missed. I'm pretty sure he's played like 13, 14 games in the last 2 or 3 years. I could be wrong there, but I think that DeAndre Swift, he's kind of a combo guy. I think that he's had bad luck, and I think that he's been pressed to play through some injuries. And so it seems like it's more magnified. On the other hand, you have a guy, Rashad Penny, who had, I think, we can all agree at this point, based on how long it took him to come back and his timelines and everything that happened. I think he had a very similar injury to Javonte Williams and J.K. Dobbins and Gus Edwards. I think that was the type of injury. So that was really, he like kind of lost 2 years there. And before that, he had a hand fracture, and then, he had this tibia fracture or fibula fracture that Tony Pollard had, kind of a freak deal too. So that's the thing, is like, do freak things just happen to Rashad Penny? Or, is he some, pariah, injury prone guy? I'm not sold on that yet. So even though I think Rashad Penny's 27. What is he? 26, 27?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. He's a first round pick, right? I mean, he has high draft capital. There's, he was a stud in his earlier days. He flashed last year. I don't think there's any reason to be, afraid of Rashad Penny other than that backfield split. And so I guess, according to my logic, if I'm nervous about DeAndre Swift, then I should probably double down on my Rashad Penny shares. And that's reflected in my drafts. I am a little more concerned with Swift, so I'm getting a lot more Penny on the back end of drafts as opposed to Swift on the front.
Yeah, Penny seems to be going really, really late, like in the hundreds or something like that. I'm grabbing him I find myself grabbing him a lot in underdog drafts as like my third or fourth running back. At that point, I think it's just that's found money at that point. So that to me is a great pick. Okay, so James Conner looks like he's going to have a workload, but he has a very extensive medical history, even considering the cancer that he recovered from. With a full workload, but what's the level of confidence considering his history?
Yeah, you asked what I learned in doing this book, and a lot of it was injury history related. I learned that James Conner has been on the injury report with an ankle issue 4 out of the last 5 years. Now I've done this dance with James Conner. I've done the dance of, he's connective tissue and 6 of the last 7 years and couldn't stay healthy here, couldn't stay healthy here. But man, other than the ribs injury last year, he stayed on the field. The year before that, he pretty much stayed on the field. I just don't know. It's sort of like the Derrick Henry argument in a sense. It's like, at what point do you just stop fighting it? I was afraid of James Conner, but I think at this point, chalk him up to miss 2 to 3 games per year. But if you need a floor guy and he's there, he's probably a decent floor guy for you. I don't think he's going to do anything extraordinary necessarily, especially in that offense. But I'm not going to tell you to shy away at James Conner. And do you know his ADP by chance?
James Conner, I'm going to give that to you in un segundo. It's coming up right here.
I should have had this. I'm a very professional podcaster, if you can't. I have all my notes in front of me, and I'm buttoned up, and I'm ready.
No, absolutely. He is coming off, because it's somewhere in the 100.
It's in the hundreds. I mean, that's all I need to know. I think if it's in the hundreds, it's like
110.
It might be 110. Yeah, I'd probably just take him there. That's fine with me.
Yeah,
let's say I take Breece Hall, like I was talking about earlier. Take Breece Hall, 30 overall, and I know that James Conner sitting back there to be my RB2. I would have no issue with that.
Yeah, I mean, Connor's kind of, you're giving people a discount right now, going off at number 84 right now, going right behind Rachaad White. And, you mentioned Swift, he's at 78. So he's not expensive, but he's also not cheap. I mean, 32 picks in front of Rashad Penny. I don't know. I don't like that one. I don't see any reason to favor Penny. I mean, I'm sorry, Swift over Penny. We're talking about so many different guys at once.
But okay, Connor's 110 is what you're saying, right?
No, Connor's 84.
84. Okay.
Yeah, Penny is 110. That one, he's the biggest discount. He is on sale at Penny's. So yes. That was a Penny joke. Deebo Samuel, he's had some injuries. He had the list, Frank. He had a couple of leg injuries last year. He had the monster season in 2021. But is the history starting to concern you?
No, I think that is if they stop giving the ball up the gut like they did when he got injured last year, I think that risk kind of dissipates a little bit. And the hamstring is really the only thing that you're super concerned about. Maybe the foot. He could have a foot issue down the line again, but it hasn't been an issue up to this point. He had the Jones fracture in 2020. He is at an elevated risk because of the hamstring. But overall, I'm not super concerned right now. I don't think I'm taking him. I think the injury history is one of those things that you can kind of tack on as like, okay, he's also in an offense with George Kittle, Christian McCaffrey, Brandon Ayuk. They score points, right? But maybe in ways that we don't necessarily want to see or in a less predictable manner. That, again, sort of in a similar vein to the conversation we were having about Jonathan Taylor, the offense in the situation scares me a little bit more than his injury history, but the injury history doesn't help.
Okay. What about Raheem Mostert? He's had a series of leg injuries, and he's age 31 for a running back, which appears to be ancient. And he's not Frank Gore, but uh, have they piled up with him?
Yeah, I think the issue that you have with him is the meniscus and cartilage issues that he's had. You're afraid at this point, especially at 31, that he sort of gets that Todd Gurley-itis, the knee arthritis that is a risk with him. So I'm not necessarily investing in any Raheem Mostert at this point. Not to say that's going to happen, but at a guy who's 31, right? Yeah, he's super fast. It's been cool. His story is cool, but it's just not really something that I'm interested in. I think it's a low risk, but also sort of a low reward play.
Yeah. Yeah, especially with that they drafted Devon A. Chain. I think there's something to be said there that he's going to be getting more involved in the offense, and maybe Mostert is like at best the second, but more than likely third option in that offense. You talked about Dalvin Cook a little bit, so we've got Cook. He still hasn't signed as of the time that we were recording this, but he had the shoulder injury. He had the shoulder surgery to repair that injury. Uh, with confidence, the thing I worry about with Cook, not from a health standpoint, I just don't know if anybody's going to come in and give him 300 touches.
Yeah, you do worry about the shoulder, but again, he's kind of a guy like with Connor. Like you obviously know he's probably going to miss a game or two, but he's been relatively healthy. The shoulder got finally cinched it down. I think this is the second surgery, so he's always at risk to have that issue again. But he's not a guy that I'm necessarily too concerned with moving forward. He's fine. I'll say he's fine.
Okay. Now, you talked about Keenan Allen, and he's been your poster child for the various injuries, but you did mention he's had hamstrings 2 years in a row. That kind of brought an end to Julio Jones. Is there a concern level? I mean, I still remember. I'll tell you what. I was at the game where he hurt his hamstring in the first game, and he and Devontae Adams were clearly the best players on the field before he got hurt. And I'm hoping to see that again.
Yeah, so this is really tough to say. Like I mentioned earlier, the recurrence rate for hamstring strains is about 30%. As you age, as all of us age, we become less flexible. We lose some natural elasticity in our muscles. We're at risk for muscle strains, and unfortunately, that's no different for wide receivers. So as he gets older, he's 31 at this point, and as we recognize that he has a history of hamstring strains now, like you said, 2 years in a row, it's really tough to see that not being an issue moving forward. But again, this isn't static analysis. Maybe he went to the facility every day this offseason, and he picked up yoga or Pilates, and he did his rehab and his prehab, and he worked on the hamstring, and he's getting everything. He's lining up his ducks in a row as best as he possibly can. And maybe the hamstring is a thing of the past. Maybe. I don't know. But there is risk there because we don't know those things, and we don't know, is he going to have a recurrence or is he not going to have a recurrence? So that is something that you consider. I do think that he still has the skill set to be a difference maker. I hope that he can stay on the field, but understanding when you draft Keenan Allen, the Julio Jones in that 2021 season, unfortunately, is the
Yes.
floor. That is the floor, and I think we need to understand that.
No, that's definitely. And I grabbed him in Scott Fishbowl, but I'm hoping for the best, but I'm bracing myself. But his teammate Mike Williams also has an extensive history with back and I mean just all sorts of injuries. But he's younger, at least. You're on mute. Oh,
Did it again. Sorry.
está bien.
I don't really understand the fear for Mike Williams. I think he's a guy. He's had the, like you said, he's had the back, and um, he's had the ankle this year, but he's not really a guy that necessarily. I don't like get scared when Mike Williams is on the injury report. Like, oh, you just kind of seem. He kind of reminds me in a way of Julio Jones, like mid-career Julio Jones. He's kind of always hurt, but he's also kind of always playing, and he's kind of always putting up the numbers that you expect him to put up. The high ankle was an exception, and those injuries happen. Like I said, those have less than a 5% true recurrence rate. So I'm not worried about that following him into next year. And so with Mike Williams, I'm kind of chilling. Like I don't mind get some Mike Williams.
Love it. Okay, well, the last guy we're going to talk about is someone of a lot of intrigue. Kadarius Toney. He's battled injuries the past couple of years, but also everything is in front of him. There's Mahomes. There's that no clear number one wide receiver. We know the number one pass catcher is Travis Kelce, but I mean, could he rise past that injury history to be a wide receiver one for the Chiefs?
You get nervous with the hamstring, but we don't really have a precedent for a player like him. We know that he needs that burst, and we know that he needs that quick twitch. And in order to do that, to decelerate and accelerate really quickly, you need your hamstrings. So you don't love the fact that he's having these hamstring issues so early on. So that is a consideration to point out. But I do think that he could provide some sort of value there. It's just a matter of how long he'll hold up, and we need to see him do it, right? That's one of the things that I subjectively incorporate into my analysis. I like when a guy has shown us in the past that they can do it, and we just haven't seen Kadarius Toney do it.
Yeah, that one's. I'd love to see it. Like the talent. That's why but I am kind of high on Sky Moore as a result. I'm going to be sitting down with my Chiefs insider pretty soon, so I'm going to get the kind of the tea leaves from the field a little bit. So I was able to find the bit link for your newsletter, so it's right there. Make sure it's pinned right underneath his Twitter bio. So make sure you're going there. So I'm going to put that here, but also make sure to go to his Twitter bio, because that's where you're going to find it for the e-newsletter. So I got a fun question. Well, first off, other than the guys that we talked about, is there anybody that you think that I haven't is going to be getting an injury discount this year?
Man,
I know we've covered a lot of guys.
I was going to say we've covered a lot of guys. I think Purdy is going to be a guy that we get a discount on. Okay. I know we mentioned him, but we didn't talk about him extensively. So that's definitely someone to keep in mind. And at this moment, I can't think of many other dudes right now. Calvin Ridley, I think people are afraid of his physical performance, which is a fair, that's fair. But I don't think it's going to matter. I think we're overweighing that. So, yeah, I think that as of now, there's not one I can think of.
Okay. Well, one thing I want to know, and I didn't put this in the show sheet. Last year, I was very disappointed that you hadn't been able to find good Mexican food in Florida. Has that you made that discovery yet?
So yes, I found one carniceria. Right.
Oh,
they have tacos, burritos, made to order, made to go. So then I can get all my Mexican candy and all the stuff that I loved growing up. Right. I kind of felt like a blast from the past, like walking into these carnicerias. And you know how it is. Like you have those memories of walking through those stores with your mom, going back, and they have like all the meat, like the butcher shop, whatever, like in the back. You get your chuletas. You get your burritos, whatever like spices you need, your tajin and your Valentina, like all that stuff that Mexicans love. Dude, what's your favorite Mexican candy? The King Carlos, the chocolate bars. Oh, dude, those are my favorite. Duvalines. What's your favorite Mexican candy?
Oh man, you know what? One that I was just thinking about when you were telling me, and I forget the name. It's the little. It's like a little, like kind of a little off white, but when it breaks up, it just like explodes. It's kind of like a little round oval, like a little round oval. It was in a little clear plastic piece.
Oh man, I don't remember what they're called.
I'm gonna have to tweet it. I'm gonna have to find it and tweet it out.
Find it and tweet it out.
It's one of those things that like you can't eat it. You almost had to eat the whole thing at once, or else you're just going to wear part of it. But it was so good, and it was just sugar. just plain sugar.
Pure
And
sugar. Yeah.
oh, just as for a kid, there's just nothing better. Oh man. And I used to love a little, little chocolate, little little hot chocolate. So
Oh yeah, like
maple.
abuelita chocomil, dude. That stuff was
Oh
fire. I
yeah.
don't know if that's yeah, dude. That
Oh,
stuff was good.
absolutely. Oh, so good. Such good. Oh, bring me back memories, mi amigo. Oh, bring me back memories. Oh, mi amigo. Muchas gracias. So, mi compadre, one more time. Pump the book, pump everything.
FB Injury Doc. If you follow FB Injury Doc and you sign up for the free newsletter, I should mention it's free newsletter. I won't spam you, I promise. Sign up for the you'll get everything, any content you need to know that you want in your inbox, that you want by at any point. Send it my way, and sign up for that newsletter. I'll send it your way.
Mi amigo, it's awesome, and I've been subscribed ever since I first heard about it. So, familia, you are not going to be disappointed. Get that free, capital free newsletter, and it's going to appear in your inbox, and you get there, and it's just chock full of information that you're going to get. So muchas gracias, mi amigo. Thank you so much, compa, for doing this. Also, one last time, last plug, Familia FFB on YouTube. Make sure you're giving us that thumbs up, and also make sure you're going to underdogfantasy.com. Use that promo code Familia23. You're going to get matched the first $100. One more time, you can find me at Jorge Martin 17 right there on Twitter. Everywhere else, it's Familia FFB. You're going to see some stuff coming out. In fact, this is going to inspire an article that's going to go out on a larger outlet that I think you're going to see. So be on the lookout for this. So muchas gracias, Edwin. Muchas gracias. Fue un gran placer, mi amigo. Un gran placer. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Jorge.
And everybody, muchas gracias. And remember, todos somos familia. Salud.